Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. I'm extremely excited about today's guest, a first-timer. We are continuing our long slide into counter-programming, so crazy things in the news are not going to show up all that much in today's episode, and that's fine by me. Today's guest is Stefan Fatsis, author of Unabridged, The Thrill of and Threat to the Modern Dictionary, which came out last October. He's also written a bunch of other books, A Few Seconds of Panic about life in the NFL, Word Freak about his days in the cutthroat business of competitive Scrabble, and Wild and Outside about minor league baseball. Stefan used to co-host Slate's weekly sports podcast, Hang Up and Listen. And he was a sports commentator on NPR's All Things Considered. Many of you probably heard him there. Longtime staff reporter of Wall Street Journal, all that kind of stuff. Man about town, can cook 10-minute brownies in 7 minutes. So, Stefan, welcome to the Remnant.
It's good to be here, Jonah. Thank you.
So I did not, in our little prep about the show, the one thing I didn't tell you is that the first question I always ask people when they have a book out is the question I always want to get on my book tours. What's your book about? So take it away.
It's about the dictionary, man. It's about the world of language and words and dictionaries in the digital age. And I'd always been long fascinated by dictionaries. Partly, you mentioned Word Freak, my book about Scrabble. I got to know the people at Merriam-Webster when I was writing that book. About more than 10 years ago, I did a piece for Slate about Merriam attempting to revise the 1961 unabridged dictionary, Webster's Third. I wrote a long 10,000-word piece about that project. And when I was done, I realized there was probably a book here. So I pitched Merriam on letting me embed as a lexicographer to learn to write definitions and see how the dictionary business works from the inside.
All right, so as a embedded lexicographer ingenue, right? You came in there with you knew some words, but like you didn't know much about being a lexicographer. What is the Daniel LaRusso wax on, wax off? Like, how do they train you up to be a lexicographer?
Well, in the olden days, pre-digital, sort of ending in the probably early 1990s, it was a formal process. They would typically hire up when the dictionary was being revised. So unabridged dictionary, once every generation, new edition every 30 or 40 years. And then the collegiate dictionary, smaller, the one that we have on our desks or had on our desks, once every 10 years. And so when Merriam-Webster would hire newbies, they would go through a training program. They had like thick manuals that they had to read. They had to do lots of practice defining and research that they were critiqued on. But by the time I got there in the mid-late 2010s, all of those practices had fallen by the wayside. The hiring was sporadic. The business had already shifted largely online. So when a newbie was brought in, it was really like one person. So basically taken aside by the guy with the best title in the world, maybe director of defining. Steve Perot was my guru, my rabbi at Merriam-Webster, and given some stuff to read. Some of it older about the process of defining, and then sort of set loose. When in the old days, Philip Gove, who was the editor of Webster's Third, said that it would take 6 months at least before a new editor could be left alone with a word. I love that phrase, right? Left alone with a word. And Gove himself wrote this 6-volume training manual rule book called the Black Books, because they were these black, spiral binders that were just dense and detailed and pedantic and fascinating to read.
Yeah.
But the idea of having that sort of rigorous training process just doesn't exist anymore because, they're not just, the lexicography is kind of a dying art and a dying business. So you're not bringing that many people aboard.
So I mean, I want to get back to the story of the dictionary in a second, but this is maybe a good way to get into it. The perennial debate, right, which goes back to the previous time they had reworked the authorized, the unabridged, was is the debate about whether or not dictionaries are for telling you how to use words or telling you how used or words are used, right? It's like, is it chronicling changes in the language, or is it trying to codify and nail down the language for all time? That Well, I'll do it open ended. What is the history of that argument?
It's pretty straightforward. The idea of, well, straightforward in a obviously very discursive, digressive way.
Yeah.
But the idea of what a dictionary is a fairly recent one. I mean, the notion of a monolingual book that lists words in alphabetical order to help people understand what things mean only goes back to the 17th century. That's not that long in terms of language, right? Dictionaries originally served that purpose, to educate. They were used mostly by philosophers and monks and researchers, and scientists and travelers, merchants. They weren't for the general public. They were very specific. That started to change in the 17th century, and then with Samuel Johnson's dictionary in the mid 18th century, where dictionaries were suddenly perceived were perceived now as a way to educate people, to help lift up the masses, to give people an opportunity to understand better these complicated forces that were shaping the world. And Johnson really is the archetype of the first sort of this kind of a dictionary, right? The dictionary that is there to serve people, all people. And until the mid 20th century, the dictionary was perceived as a book that is there to prescribe, to tell you how to use language properly. This debate over prescriptivism versus descriptivism is a fairly recent one. I mean, it really is only since the mid 20th century that people are engaging in a conversation about the purpose of the dictionary. Is it to describe the way that people use language, as you laid out, or to describe language in a way that you should use it? That's been settled, honestly, in the last 50 years. The descriptivists have won. There is no debate in lexicographic circles about what the right approach to lexicography is anymore. The dictionary now is a database that is intended to show people how we use words, how we create them, and how we adapt to them, and how we apply them. The dictionary's job is to chronicle that change. It's not to pass judgment on usage. And dictionaries are creatively finding ways to help people bridge that sort of desire to be told how a word should be used versus to see how words are used. And that's, I think, to me, one of the most interesting changes is that the way definitions at Merriam particularly are now fuller. So you get more usage notes to help guide you, so that if you go to look up something like literally and you're pissed off that people use literally to mean figuratively, there will be a note that explains that people have been using literally to mean figuratively for 200 years, and there's nothing wrong with this. But at the same time, it's understandable why people blanch at that use. So the dictionary tries to explain why things are the way they are.
Yeah, I mean, all right. So, full disclosure, I've had John McWhorter on here a few times.
I'm sure you have,
and
yeah.
we've gone round and round about some of this. I'm a bit of a Burkean, right? So I'm in favor of change. I just like it more slow, and so I'm okay with the compendium of how words are used. Things I love etymology, and etymology is my favorite thing about dictionaries, and the number of words that have come to mean the opposite of what they originally meant or completely different things is just staggering, right? I love that stuff. And you can't love that stuff about the past without accepting that it's going to go on in the present as well, right? Where I have less of a problem with about individual words than I have about a, basically, and I love John McWhorter, but like basically his position is if you can get away with it, then it's the correct usage. And if you can't get away with it, it's not. And I mean, I'm sure he would say that's unfair, but, um, you know, when it comes to grammar, when it comes to, you know, uh, basic rules of pronunciation and syntax, I think it is actually good to have some common rules. And it's actually, I don't want to make it political about this, but the people for whom it is the most advantageous are actually the marginalized people because it is a gateway to being accepted in, it's like BBC English. If you can learn BBC English, you can get in through a lot of doors. So like people don't understand how much language holds people back and pronunciation holds people back and vocabulary holds people back. And like having it all there, having one set rule that is acceptable with some flex to it, obviously, I think has value.
Yeah, nobody's saying that it's open season, right? I mean, dictionaries, in my experience at Merriam, what I was impressed by the most is the flexibility that you allude to there. The acknowledging that people are going to take language and do with it what they will. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything goes. There are rules in the dictionary still. Those usage notes are ways to guide people to understand that, look, irregardless has been used for 200 years also, but you may not want to use it because it is widely perceived to be inappropriate or improper or substandard or non-standard or whatever monetary label you want to affix to it. So the dictionary still is a guide. You can still go there and read something and come away understanding that, oh, I get it. People do this, but I may not want to do this. The dictionary has just sort of gotten itself out of the business of rapping you on the knuckles and saying wrong, 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 because the business of the dictionary has evolved into not criticizing you for your usage, but acknowledging it and then explaining why it is not always necessarily the case that something should be used the way that it is used.
Okay, I'm going to set you up for a totally fair ambush in a second.
Sure.
But why don't we start with how did they at Merriam-Webster think about the fraught issue? Is that the political the meaning of words is from time immemorial has political valences that can get you in a lot of trouble, right? How did they think about their role in political discourse in the moment, right? In political controversies and whatnot.
This may sound like a dodgy answer, but the politics of the people that run dictionaries tend to be academic, more liberal. No surprise.
Yeah.
I have never worked around people with a greater sense of objectivity in their daily job than the people I worked with at Merriam-Webster. The political part of the discourse over how to define something is really non-existent. They are like forensic researchers. The imperative to conduct as much research from as broad a swath of written English in order to craft fair definitions. I mean, these are all subjective terms, right? But the volume of research and attempt to be even-handed was kind of staggering to me. Just the diligence and the care and the apolitical approach toward language was incredibly impressive. It's scholarly, it's monkish. These are people that I've worked in a lot of newsrooms, and I've never worked around people that were so on task and so deliberate in the process of doing their work and really keen on divorcing themselves from any sort of bias. And when they get blowback, and Merriam has gotten blowback, and I document a bunch of this in Unabridged over revisions to definitions or new definitions. There's not even a sort of reflexive entrenchment in defense of, but a belief that, we did this as above board and straightforward as possible. And I don't know quite else how to put it, but they are the level of care was so great in the work that they did when I was there that it was kind of impressive, to be able to pull yourself out of the political discourse, as heavy as that was. I mean, I was there sort of between 2016 and 2020 actively. It was different than anything I had experienced as a professional.
Okay, so this is perfect setup. Because again, I'm probably more sympathetic to prescriptivism than a lot of people, but I perfectly acknowledge the need for the descriptivism stuff. Sure. Right? It's
finding the balance, man.
Right.
It's really about doing the descriptive work because that's the obligation. How are people using language?
Right.
We need to tell them how they're using it. But at the same time, we don't want to mislead people about how they should use words or what they meant or mean.
So my problem is when people try to have it both ways.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was a very bad moment when, and maybe there's, I haven't gotten to the book yet. So if it's in there, I'm very happy to hear about it. I thought it was a bad moment during the Amy Coney Barrett hearings, where almost in real time, they, was it Senator Hirono said that decisions where Amy Coney Barrett referred to sexual preference, that was an offensive term because it suggests that your sexual identity is just a choice and blah, 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 which is a fine objection to the term sexual preference, but it was widely used for decades as just a neutral term for how people, define their sexual attraction, right? And that's the way she had used it. There was no ill intent or anything like that, and it was an ambush. And Merriam-Webster changed the definition almost in real time to say it was an offensive term. And it seems to me like that was one of my big gripes is institutions not staying in their lanes. And that's how it felt to me, is that they jumped out of the lane and wanted to sort of tag into a political controversy in the moment, where it'd be fine if they say, oh, this is interesting, we probably should update our definition, but not within 24 hours or wherever it was of the actual hearing, which made a lot of right-wingers have it fueled their lack of trust and confidence in institutions when it seemed like something as supposedly apolitical as the dictionary came to the rescue of one party in a partisan nasty fight.
I do not know how quickly Merriam or when Merriam changed or added sexual preference to the lexicon. It's highly unlikely that they did it in response to a news event. And I will tell you why. And the reason is that the process of updating a dictionary is remarkably laborious. And up until the last 3 or 4 years, Merriam didn't have the technological ability to update a definition, an entry, in real time, or even in 1 or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or a month. The process of making changes in the dictionary, even in the digital age, is a slow one. Dictionary entries are incredibly complex with lots of moving parts. Merriam had very unsophisticated back office operations. That all really hasn't changed since post-pandemic. Or during the pandemic, when they upgraded a lot of their systems. So I don't know what the TikTok is on when or how or why Merriam changed sexual preference, the entry for sexual preference. Merriam's been criticized for allegedly changing the definition of assault rifle, which it didn't do other than to update the mechanics of how particular arms are defined. It was accused of political manipulation in entries or changing entries for marriage. Again, years after those entries were changed to reflect changes in culture. So I don't know what happened with sexual preference, but I could assure you that there's nobody in Springfield, Massachusetts who was sitting at their desktop computer, which is what we had when I was working there, saying, oh, wow, we need to make sure this is entered as offensive. The process that I never saw Merriam deviate from was doing research to determine how frequently a term is used, in what context, and finding citations for its usage before making any changes.
Okay, so I have no reason to doubt you or anything like that. All I'll say is that if you go back and you Google the phrases Amy Coney Barrett, Merriam-Webster, sexual preference, because I remember following that pretty closely at the time. If your version of it is right, and again, I have no reason to doubt you, and it sounds like this might be an accurate description. Merriam-Webster sucks at PR, at like defending itself against these kinds of things, which may be true, right? I mean, that made the
because
case.
It just usually just doesn't engage, right? I mean, Merriam has never felt that its role is to defend its definitions. It only has done so when the shit has hit the fan.
Right.
So in sort of particularly for entries like the N-word, or where there have been sort of write-in campaigns to try to get Merriam to change entries or to get words removed from the dictionary. It has always fallen back on, look, we just do an objective job of trying to tell people how words are used. We don't make up the words. We are just here to tell you how they are used. Again, I'm looking at the entry for sexual preference now, and to be honest, it's kind of thin, right? I mean, the only definition of it is a link to the entry for sexual orientation. And then there's a usage note for sexual preference that says the term sexual preference as used to refer to sexual orientation, that is, whether a person is bisexual, straight, gay, pansexual, etc., is widely considered offensive in its implied suggestion that a person can choose who they are sexually or romantically attracted to.
I have no problem with that.
I'm not even disagreeing with you, Jonah. I mean, I see where you're coming from. And again, like, we are old enough to remember when sexual preference was used interchangeably with, are you gay or are you straight?
Right. I mean, it was, just the term, right? I mean, it was like written into laws, like you should not discriminate based on sexual preference. That wasn't
correct.
The idea that was a derogatory term. So
it is a term that goes back to, again, looking at the first date of usage in the Merriam entry, goes back to 1955.
Yeah.
When we were not having that conversation.
Right. So my only point is that if it is as innocent and as above board the operation as you say it is, the coverage at the time was literally there were headlines, Merriam-Webster changes definition to run to the aid of Democrats, right? And if that was completely untrue and inaccurate, and it was just a weird coincidence, they should have sent someone out to say that's not how it happened.
Mean, so, but anyway, you get an argument from me there, right?
I don't want to dwell hugely on this, but let's talk about the and that was the extent of my ambush. Because it's
happy to be ambushed on that. That's fine.
Yeah. But like, I mean, probably a better example of the substantive thing that we're talking about here with sexual preference is the word colored. Right? I mean, like the NAACP is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It's not a racist organization, but colored, for completely understandable reasons, came to mean a bigoted thing. So how did like the dictionary, does it, I'll just put it this way. Understanding the tension between the descriptivist and the prescriptivist impulses and all of that, do they want to be a leading indicator or a lagging indicator when it comes to a word like that? Like, do they want to like help the transformation, or do they want to be the last? Now it's official because even the dictionary has flipped its meaning on this.
Yeah, I think dictionaries historically have been lagging indicators because they are collecting information about how language is changing and then throwing it back at the public. So there's always a gap, and people are constantly going to the dictionary and saying, "Oh, that's not what that means anymore," or "Why isn't this word in the dictionary yet?" Because dictionaries forever had a very deliberative process of deciding whether a word has risen to a level that merits inclusion. I mean, it was like the height, line at an amusement park ride, right?
Right.
You got to clear it to get in. And typically, again, largely because of publishing cycles, right? Merriam was publishing an update to the Collegiate Dictionary every 10 years and doing reprintings in between, but those weren't sort of full overhauls. So you had time, and words, the sort of the guiding principle at Merriam was that words needed to ferment. You needed to collect citations, examples of usage in print and professionally edited print publications over a long period of time before a word was ready to be released to the world as a member of the club. And that process was, 6, 8, 10 years typically. Words were just not rushed in. The quickest a word was included from creation to entry in Merriam was 2 years. And that was AIDS. And it was added to a new printing of the Collegiate Dictionary in 1984, I think. And until COVID, because of technology, Merriam now had the ability to do an emergency update. So in 2020, COVID was added after 34 days.
Yeah.
Because there was such demand, people were going to the website constantly, typing in the letter COVID and getting nothing, getting a 404 message. We don't enter that. So the imperative to react quickly in that case was a matter of life and death, right? People really needed to know what COVID meant and what stay at home meant and what shelter in place meant or whatever. And so the dictionary was serving a sort of public service role. But that sort of slow process often meant that the dictionary looks out of date. And the joke at dictionary publishers was always, the dictionary's out of date the minute it rolls off the press because language is forever changing and we cannot keep up with it. So the dictionary, partly for editorial reasons, like safety reasons, like, standard reasons, we need to wait until, this word has settled into the language before we add it. That caution has always propelled dictionary making. We want to be right. We want to be safe. We want to make sure something is going to stick around and not just be sort of passing slang that we add. And that was really a print phenomenon because when you updated a dictionary, you wanted to add 5,000 or 10,000 words every 10 years. That means you had to take something out because the book couldn't be exponentially larger than the previous edition. So those were editorial decisions, but they were also undergirded by this notion that language needs to be, words need to be stable and accepted and familiar before we can add them. We don't want to be that leading indicator. We want to be a lagging one.
All right, so I get that. What's the process for deciding to take a word out of the dictionary?
Well, not anymore. I mean, there is no taking words out of the dictionary anymore because we don't have to, because the internet is a bottomless dictionary. There's no need to do that parsing anymore, that culling. That was a print phenomenon, and print doesn't matter anymore. Merriam did, I will add, publish a revised edition of its collegiate dictionary in November, and they did remove words. Most of the words they removed, they said, were sort of scientific or outdated. But the reason for publishing a new edition of the collegiate dictionary for the first time in 22 years was more about marketing than it was about lexicography.
Mhm.
It's not like people are buying hundreds of thousands of copies of Merriam's collegiate dictionary. I mean, this was a book that was a perennial on the New York Times how-to and list in the 80s and 90s. This was more about like, oh, retro book, cool, let's like Air Jordans or vinyl records, right? You should get this cool book. It's the anti-AI. It's a physical book that you can open up on your desk and look something up. You can trust us. It was about authority and about marketing. But you don't need to take words out now, Jonah. It's like, and that's one of it's one of the great things about the dictionary and the internet. It's the perfect delivery vehicle for this medium. And the challenge for dictionaries now is trying to figure out how to harness it and keep users coming to their websites, because even though Merriam does still publish books, and even though there is interest in schools and in technical books, science, medical dictionaries, legal dictionaries, that's not a business model for this industry anymore.
Yeah, we can get back to that in a second, because that makes me sad.
Yes.
But just a quick question: in your rough and tumble Scrabble days, were you ever horrified when they took out a word from the dictionary that was one of your go-to words?
Scrabble, unlike the physical dictionary, unlike the mainstream dictionary, did go through revisions where words were eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
And that hasn't happened in a long time either. I mean, other than slurs being taken out, and that's a separate conversation that I'm happy to engage in.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I remember when I started playing Scrabble, almost 30 years ago, 25 years ago, there were words like VON was an acceptable word. That got taken out. Going even farther back to before I started playing, when competitive Scrabble started becoming a thing in the late 70s, they used the dictionary. The go-to dictionary was Funk and Wagnalls, and it included like JA and other short words that were not in Merriam or other standard American collegiate dictionaries. Scrabble players, though, are like, just tell me what the words are. I don't care what they mean. It's like, it's just, what's the list? Nobody wants to forget words, so it is frustrating when words are taken out. There are two competing, because of course there are Scrabble organizations in North America right now, and one employs a dictionary, the lexicon, that was unexpurgated. It has all of the slurs still in it. The other one expurgated most of the slurs during COVID, during George Floyd. And if you toggle back between these two word lists, like I play in one tournament that's sanctioned by this group and another tournament sanctioned by that group, you have to remember like what's added, what wasn't added, what was taken out, what was put back in. And that's really annoying. Scrabble players it's kind of the anti-dictionary, right? It's like, we love the list of words, but just tell us what the list of words is and keep it stable, except to update it with new stuff.
So as someone who absolutely loves learning about examples of the narcissism of small differences.
Yes.
People's Front of Judea versus Judean People's Front. There's that great It's American Life episode about the two warring professional Santa
that was great. Yeah, I remember that one.
I love that stuff. I love that. Because I actually think most of human history, or not most of human history, but a huge amount of geopolitical and political history, if you look deep enough, the conflicts are driven by the narcissism of small differences. And so how heated do the arguments get between the rival Sharks and Jets Scrabble organizations?
It's less about direct conflict than it is frustration among
Because they're all looking at their
members.
shoes because they're all on the spectrum kind of thing.
Well, I wouldn't go quite that far. You'd be nice to us Scrabble players, Jonah. It's more like institutional frustration than it is like the specific, I support this group, I support that group. There are definitely some diehards, right, that support the rival faction that split off from the mainstream group 15 years ago. It's mostly frustration because we all want there to be sort of one unified, simplified lexicon that we all know we are playing when we are playing in North America under the North American Dictionary. There's also a separate lexicon that is international, that is based on British dictionaries, and it's much bigger because there are more words. It includes words from other English-speaking cultures around the world. But the frustrating part is just when you're confused.
Yeah.
Like this weekend, I played in a tournament this weekend in Alexandria, Virginia. And at lunch, we talk about Scrabble at lunch, of course, during Scrabble tournaments. And I was saying like, this morning we were talking about the slur issue. And I was like, I couldn't remember if HAOLE was added back to the lexicon or whether that one was still taken out. And I was like, HAOLE, I think it's a slur for a Hawaiian person. And the person I was talking to said, no. It's a slur against non-Hawaiian
That's right.
people.
Yeah.
It was like,
so it's so funny you mentioned this, howling, right? So my wife spent a lot of time, my wife's from Alaska, but they, like a lot of Alaskans, they spend a lot of time in Hawaii because it's literally the closest warm beach.
Yep.
And to this day, we, not to get into the whole recent controversy about white culture, but when we have like the really traditional, like the pictures on the box kind of dinner of like the hard shell tacos, my wife will say, we're going to have haole tacos tonight. And it just means like the white person's conception, the conventional, boring white person's conception of what the dish is supposed to be like.
This is what I love about language, Jonah. Like, I'm like playing in a Scrabble tournament, thinking about whether haole is acceptable in this particular lexicon, which, by the way, it was taken out at one point and added back in.
That's interesting.
Because it was perceived as not slurry enough.
Yeah.
I mean, again, objective, subjective decisions that in Scrabble are not as justifiable, as understandable as at Merriam-Webster, for instance. But look, I'm thinking about this word on Saturday, and you're telling me a story about it on Tuesday.
Yeah,
and love that about language.
I mean, there are definitely some Hawaiians who use it as a serious pejorative,
right?
But then it's like at the same time, there's a lot of flex for saying things about white people that it just doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't bother me. All right, but I have to say, and I know you've talked about this before, but your approach to Scrabble, which makes total sense as a Scrabble guy, is at the opposite end of the spectrum for me as an etymology guy.
Of course.
Right? Because for you, you're basically turning the words into math problems, right? You're turning them into just coded digits with different things, and you don't really care what the words mean, right?
I care, but I don't need to know that.
Yeah.
It's not central to the practice of the game. It is a math game.
Yeah.
It just happened to be based in language. Language is what's beautiful about the game. I mean, the way I like to describe or think about Scrabble and obscure language is that the game is a force for liberating words from the sort of purgatory of the dictionary. Words that we don't use every day get this life on a Scrabble board. And I love thinking about language that way, that it's bigger than I am. It's bigger than my little brain and the words that I use to write and talk every day. Language is much more multifaceted and multifarious than the sort of narrow way that we apply it in our daily lives. And a game like Scrabble helps to free it up. I mean, I played Zebroid this weekend in a tournament. That was really cool. I played Aquavit, the Scandinavian liquor.
I know Aquavit. What is Zebroid?
I think Zebroid just means like a genus of animals, zebra.
Like zebra-like. Interesting.
Zebra leg, related to or resembling a zebra, and it's in Merriam-Webster.
That's fantastic.
I also stuck an S on it,
Uh-huh.
and it was not challenged. I played zebroids for 107 points. My opponent didn't challenge it. Zebroid does not take an S. So these sort of gradations in how words are used, and and whether what rules apply to them individually is also what's really fun about a Scrabble in language. And I really did view it as a sort of parallel experience, like learning tens of thousands of words to become an expert Scrabble player, and then going inside Merriam-Webster to try to understand more specifically how those words are treated and categorized and classified.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I get it, but like, if you like etymology, then
it's not your game,
then
man.
obviously, not only do you care about what the word means, you care about why it means something different than what it used to mean, right?
Yeah.
And or like I don't know, legal doublets. I just think are one of the most fascinating things in American language or English language. And whenever you explain them to people, they're like, that's wild. And this basically, I mean, there are a bunch of just so stories about why we have them, Law and Order, right? Is that, but definitely part of the explanation is that after the Norman conquest, you had, you had courts where some people only spoke French and some people only spoke the Old English. And so to describe a crime, you had to use one word from Old English and one word from French.
I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I think, and like when you start going through them, it's like there's some cease and desist, Law and Order, legal and valid. There are all of these terms that we mostly know from like TV shows: high crimes and misdemeanors, right? Hue and cry, free and clear. And not all of them fit the French Old English thing, but most of them do, or a lot of them do. And I just think that's I love that kind of stuff. Or
I love that.
Where the word slush fund comes from. There's all that British Navy stuff that I think is just really fascinating, but it does not help me in Scrabble.
No. They're just separate things. Like the key to understanding like these worlds, I think, is being open-minded in different ways, right? Lexicography is about accepting that meanings change, usage changes, people are creative in how they deploy and invent new things to describe the way that we circulate in the world. Scrabble is just about taking all of that and spitting it back out. It's about, for the very best players, it's about learning every single discrete combination of letters that are legally acceptable for this game. And if along the way you learn something about language, bonus. I know top players that not only methodically have learned every word, every acceptable letter string, but also sort of work their way through learning each definition. Because learning the definitions does help. Like, if I had remembered that zebroid was an adjective, I may not have stuck an S on it, even though I probably would have to test my opponent because I needed the 100 points.
Yeah.
But I would have known that, he's a really good player. He's likely to know that zebroid doesn't take an S. And if I knew that it was an adjective, I would have been helped in that situation. But anyway, it's like, to me, it's that wonderful confluence of math and language, which is what makes it such a great game and makes it distinct from what I did for this book, for Unabridged.
Yeah. So, it's funny. There's a real tension, right? Because you like your dictionary book, you were very much in the descriptivism camp. That's what dictionaries are, blah, blah, blah. But you have to have a healthy amount of prescriptivism to make Scrabble work.
Totally.
Because otherwise, hey man, this is the way I use that word.
Right.
And then the whole thing just becomes, made up usages, right?
Yeah. No, it's still like, I don't know why, but I've been doing Scrabble for a long time, and it still astonishes me that people, and maybe it should, that people don't quickly understand that this isn't a word game. People want to believe that this is a word game because it was born as a word game. And the idea of language as having these alt uses is difficult for a lot of people to accept. And you want to get back into the politics of language. It's difficult for a lot of people to accept that language is manipulated for a cause and for reasons. People are creative in how they try to take something that's out there and alter it to suit their purposes. And that's sort of like an objective assessment of what a lot of people would be horrified by, right? Whether it's how the right has exploited the use of woke or other terms that originated in African American culture, or how terms like pro-choice evolved historically to meet a political moment, or how there are political consultants whose job effectively is to try to come up with words with terms like death tax to make the estate tax seem worse. And I went to college with Frank once, so he's an old friend. So, I mean, the use of language just sort of like forensically, I find fascinating. And that's part of why I was interested in doing this book.
It's also the case that, like, I'm not a big Trump guy. I don't like populism, don't like left-wing populism, don't like right-wing populism. And it is also the case, though, that sometimes mass, and I don't use this necessarily, I don't mean it in a pejorative sense, but mass ignorance about what a word means can create monumental political problems, right? And like, you've been around DC long enough, you might remember there was a huge controversy. I think the guy made a very big mistake doing this, but he was on descriptivist, perfectly valid grounds.
Oh, yeah, I know where you're going.
Where he used the word in a budget debate about, or a discussion about the DC budget. And I want to be very clear to the listeners, who I think a lot of them in good faith think I'm using a terrible word. He said we shouldn't be niggardly, which has a Scandinavian root, which means being spendthrift, but like being being cheap, right?
Right.
But it was monumentally stupid in a black majority town where particularly where the governor is majority black, to use a word that most people don't know that sounds an awful lot like that other word. And he got in a lot of trouble. He got fired. He shouldn't have been fired, but you can get into that kind of mess as well.
Language is complicated. I mean, there's a reason that we take care with how we use words, or should take care. And we should be careful about the way that we write and talk. I mean, that's what dictionaries are for, right? I mean, they are there for they serve an important purpose culturally. I mean, chronicling how we use language, how we create words, how we change their meanings, how we adapt them, how we change their pronunciations. That is all, I think, sort of central to who we are as people, like to living in a society that cares about the way we communicate and the way we think. This reference source, to me, has a much higher purpose. And I think it is one of I think Noah Webster, the first great American lexicographer who set us down this path of dictionaries looking the way they look, and performing the service that they perform, was a political guy, right? I mean, he was a politician. He was a newspaper publisher. He wore his politics on his sleeve. And yet he understood that there was this underlying fundamental, crucial role that a dictionary could play in the establishment of an American country, right? Of an American nation. Like, we are distinct from England. One of the ways we need to demonstrate that is by having a dictionary. He wanted to call it originally an American dictionary. He was criticized politically for that idea and settled on an American dictionary. I'm sorry, he wanted to call it a dictionary of the American language, as opposed to the English language. He pulled back from that. He walked that back and ended up calling his monumental 1828 dictionary an American dictionary of the English language. It was a compromise. Sort of like like Oriole Park at Camden Yards, right?
Just out of curiosity, I was thinking about it earlier because we were talking about slang and stuff. Do you have strong opinions one way or the other about Mencken's An American Language?
I'll confess I didn't read the whole thing. I
Yeah.
did read parts of it for the research for this book and do quote from it occasionally. Mencken was like an incredibly important figure in establishing sort of slang and establishing the collection of current language as important.
Yeah.
He was one of the forerunners of the creation of the most important, most prominent academic journal about American language called American Speech.
Mm-hmm.
He worked closely with a prominent linguist named Louise Pound, who was one of the founders of American Speech, who was one of his primary sources of research for his books. So you see the historical intersections of people like Webster, like Mencken, in the documenting and supporting the chronicling of popular usage. That was all really interesting to me too. It's like the idea of like what Mencken was doing is something that we do, that people are familiar with now. Like, oh, new slang, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's on social media. Somebody's collecting it. You can easily find stuff.
It was Urban Dictionary with more
It was Urban Dictionary, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that still exists. I mean, American Speech still publishes in every issue a section called Among the New Words that are sort of like it's the bleeding edge of new language. There was a professor that I met who taught at UNC for 40 years, a linguist, who every semester would hand out 3x5 cards to her students and ask them to write down write down slang that they were currently using on campus. And like hundreds of those wound up as citations in slang dictionaries and in the Oxford English Dictionary. These records of how we use language are essential to understanding what we are as a culture.
Is there a rule of thumb about whether or not the internet, social media, all that kind of stuff is increasing the pace of new words? And if so, by what rate? And if not, why not?
No one has done there have been lots of academic studies about the internet's influence on language. Everyone believes that for obvious reasons that the internet and social media have increased the speed with which, if not words are created, the speed with which they are transmitted and then adopted.
Yeah.
It's much faster just to get a word out there and see if it sticks than it would have been in eras where it was just print or radio or TV. It's just faster, right?
And you get in front of more eyeballs more quickly. Yeah.
More eyeballs more quickly. I mean, you think of something like, go back to the late 2010s and a word like on fleek, which was created by, a young woman in Chicago, posted on social media, and within months it was being used as a tagline for big advertisers. That wouldn't have happened in the 1980s. It would have to be on Saturday Night Live, and then people would have to start saying it, and then it would take a few weeks, and then maybe months. But now it's instantaneous. Does that mean that words are created more than they were in previous generations? I'm not convinced that that's the case.
I'm not either. It's interesting. I could see being surprised by the findings in almost every direction, right? I mean, because America, in the time of Mencken, let's say, had just been inundated with immigrants from all over the place, and they were all bringing their polyglot, weird language stuff, and it was getting used in street markets and that kind of stuff. And so, I once did a deep dive. There's a myth, you'll hear it all the time, that WAP, the slander, slur against Italians, was actually an acronym that stood for without papers.
Right.
Just not true. Not true. Just fake, right?
There's a lot of those, right?
Yeah.
Fat, pretty hips and thighs. All of those are. There's a lot. Fuck has one. Like there are like all
for
kinds.
Uncommon knowledge or something
exactly,
like
yes.
Or carnal knowledge, yeah.
Carnal knowledge.
So like the number of when you read the Mencken book, like the amount of that kind of stuff that was coming in because of immigration, I kind of feel like the rate at which Spanish is introducing new words to English is probably tapered off just because it's been going on for so long.
Correct.
But, anyway, it'd be a really interesting thing.
It's not just immigration either, John.
Yeah.
It's like you think about like the number of terms that were introduced to the language because of World War I.
Yeah.
After World War I was astronomical.
Yeah.
The OED actually did do a study about World War I language and sort of tried to chart the rate of growth and the introduction of new words. And somebody referenced that study after COVID, saying that we hadn't seen the rapid spread of new terminology since World War I.
Yeah.
So war, science, sports, leisure time, all of these sort of early mid 20th century phenomena were responsible for tremendous, the introduction of tons of new words. And you go back, which I did for the book, and I read the introductions to a bunch of dictionaries over time, then editors write a long, 2,000 or 3,000 word intro to the book. And every single one of them talks about how this has been the most fruitful, productive, rapid era of linguistic change, and we are here to document it for you. So I don't think it's any different now. We just have a better way of identifying them and collecting them in places like Urban Dictionary, which has kind of been discredited in the lexicographic world in the last decade or so from its earlier, more sort of positive appreciation when it was introduced. So you see now, like the last remaining American dictionaries are Merriam-Webster and dictionary.com. And both of them now have slang portals, right? Verticals, where they can now take things that are recent-ish. They're not cutting edge recent because kids are inventing stuff and more rapidly than dictionaries can catch up to them. But there's a place to put that stuff, this sort of way station, so that now we can do what like American Speech, the academic journal, was doing in the 1940s. We can do it online in real time at a much more effective way that does make it seem like, ooh, wow, look, there's so many new terms. They're all collected over here. Language is so productive now because of the internet.
Yeah, and so it's funny. I had this, one of these days when I get enough FU money, I'm going to write my sci-fi novel, and
don't wait.
Or novels, and
one of the Don't wait for the FU money. Just do it.
You talk to my wife, and one of the things I often think about is, and it's sort of serendipitous that it's I'm talking to you about this, is that let's say the trends that you're documenting continue, and basically the printed dictionary eventually, the actual hard copy dictionary truly goes away, not just as an ornamental kitsch thing, but just goes away, right? Like a lot of books. And let's just say books go away. And so like fast forward 1,000 years and there's some solar flare or something, and it just erases all of our hard drives and we have to start over. You could really see very quickly how the English that we use today would appear to be sort of like when you try to read Beowulf, in the Old English, it's just, that word is sort of like what we have now, but it'd be totally incomprehensible and you'd have no references to say, how do I translate this stuff? How do I deal with this stuff? There's something creepy to me about it all moving on to the web. And I don't know how you stop it. I don't know if you can stop it or you should stop it or anything like that. But I'm glad that there's still hard copies being printed.
I'm glad that Merriam published the 12th edition of the Collegiate Dictionary. Yeah, for sure. I wish that Oxford would spend some of its, university money because the OED is, unlike Merriam-Webster, not a business that has to generate a profit, and print another physical edition of those books.
Those books are amazing. I mean, I love
those books are amazing.
The Oxford.
They also weigh 150 pounds.
Yeah.
Except for the one with the microscope. Right?
Yeah.
With the microscope, with the magnifying glass.
Yeah.
But there is something lost. I mean, one of the things I loved the most about working at Merriam or embedding at Merriam was the access to the paper.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't talked about their These are called the consolidated files. They're the citation files on the main editorial floor in Springfield in this old building, 1940. Merriam's been there ever since. 16 million slips of paper in these old card catalog files, not wooden, metal files, that were used for the production of all of the print dictionaries up until basically the turn of the century.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 100 years of collected knowledge about American language. I would argue it's like the greatest repository of information about the evolution and production of words in our time.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't use them anymore because the citations, the little slips of paper that had like cutouts from newspapers or magazines, or they're handwritten, typed up, different from all kinds of sources that were collected so that editors would then go to the files, pull out the stack about a particular word, and write the definition based on that information. I mean, those are just sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a real fear that and all the other incredible material in Merriam's building, all of this stuff. I mean, from like these wonderful, more cards with these little drawings that accompanied definitions in dictionaries. Like there are catalogs filled with this stuff, plus all of the archival material, correspondence, letters to the dictionary complaining about whatever word. It's all there in Merriam's basement or on its editorial floor. And there's a fear, at least I have this fear, that this stuff is all going to get lost. Merriam doesn't want to invest in an archivist. There isn't a university that's expressed interest in acquiring all of this material and saving it. And as long as Merriam is in this old building in Springfield, they probably want to keep all that stuff there. I mean, I do worry, and I write about this in Unabridged. I worry that at some point, some business person who is running Merriam, right now the company is owned by Encyclopedia Britannica, is going to say, we don't need to be in Springfield. We don't need this old building. We don't need this material. And who knows what will happen? Maybe a university will take some of it. Maybe some of it will go to the Smithsonian, and the rest of it probably will get thrown out.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a terrible loss culturally.
That would make me very sad.
It would make me very sad.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that happened. So my dad was a newspaper guy, right?
Yeah.
And the amount of stuff when they changed offices, he didn't work for a newspaper. He worked for News Syndicate. He worked for, and so he, tried to salvage a bunch of stuff, which I still have in boxes here, but like they were throwing away telegrams to like war correspondents in like Ernie Pyle, right?
Yeah.
Like they were throwing away telegrams and letters to guys who were, in Anzio and that kind of stuff. And I think there's been a massive amount of that no one's really sort of documented the extent that because there's a lot of forgetting that has come with digitization as well. There are a lot of, like, my dad wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal almost 20 years ago about dictionaries, about the political biases of dictionaries. And I wanted to call it up and talk to you about it on here. And it's like, I can't even get it out of the Wall Street Journal archives. I mean, it's just like vanished. And there's an enormous amount of stuff that, I remember Washington Post had a piece about this 30 years ago about how there were all of these oral history first-person interviews with Holocaust survivors, but they were done on a really weird form of recording device that no one knew how to transfer the stuff off of. Anyway, my only point is that I think the move towards digitization has actually jettisoned a huge amount of American global history.
I think it's a gigantic threat. I visited Oxford when I was reporting the book, and I mean that's a place that cares about the printed history, the paper history. Their archive system is, it's like going into like the CIA headquarters. You have to you got to buzz through. It is like all climate controlled and preserved in a modern library type situation. I mean, as opposed to Merriam, where it's all just literally scattered. It's like in this dungeon of a basement and in these cabinets, in these metal filing cabinets on the main floor. And I think there's it's a legit fear. This is a business, as I mentioned earlier, in decline. This is a business that is still making money. Merriam does really well. I mean, as a modern media company, it has weathered some difficulties. When I was there, they laid people off, which was unheard of at Merriam-Webster. They are constantly in battle, like every other media company, to find ways to game SEO and drive more viewers to the website. You go to Merriam's website now, and there are like a dozen games. There's a daily crossword puzzle. I mean, it's all about trying to attract eyeballs to make sure that we can stay in business and charge advertisers, which to me is really sad. I mean, this is the model that the Merriam brothers, George and Charles Merriam, who acquired the rights to Noah Webster's dictionary after Webster died in 1843, was a capitalist one from the jump. Yeah. These guys wanted to make money. Webster was a shitty businessman. The Merriam brothers were in it to be successful entrepreneurs and to run a successful publishing business. And that model stuck because of these two guys. And dictionary publishing, rather than being a either government or academic institution that was there to preserve language or to perform this higher public service, was a business and remains that in the United States. And I'm not sure that's going to be tenable going forward. And, we don't think of the dictionary as a business, right? We think of it as this sort of this
a public good.
Public good, yes, given to us to use. We don't think of the people behind the book or the website actually writing the definitions and doing the research. But we don't have, we think of it as a public good, but in reality, it's not treated as a public good.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's going to have to be resolved. And I don't know what the answer is. I write about this toward the end of the book. I don't know what the model is. Like the billionaire model in dictionary publishing, we've tried that. Dan Gilbert bought dictionary.com in the late 2010s, sold it a couple of years ago to an ed tech company. So that doesn't seem like a solution in this country. Government's certainly not going to step in and fund
it feels to me like the dictionary. Wikipedia model is the kind of
what crowdsourcing has been pretty good.
Yeah.
And the Wiktionary isn't bad, a crowdsourced dictionary. I mean, Urban Dictionaries, crowdsourced and less reliable, but it's worked. Dictionaries have tried to, tap into the public interest in language to bolster entries. I mean, you can go back to the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary, Jonah. The way that the OED collected information was through a call to the public.
Yeah.
Asked the public to send us examples of words, cut them out of newspapers and magazines, put them on 4x6 cards. They use 4x6 cards at the OED, not 3x5, which is what Merriam used. Send them to us at this address. I mean, the OED was effectively it was a crowdsourced dictionary with editors writing, composing the definitions. That model could work. I don't know. I think there's got to be some sort of hybrid public-private. Maybe it'll be what's going to happen to journalism. Maybe it will be nonprofit based, but I think it's essential that something happen that allows the American dictionary to live on.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much for doing this. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jonah. This was really fun. Thank you for having me on, man.
The full title of the book is Unabridged, The Thrill of and Threat to the Modern Dictionary. Thanks so much for being on The Remnant. Hope to have you back.
Thank you, Jonah.
All right, Stefan Fatsis has left the studio. There's something about his name that makes me frumper and second guess myself. Maybe it's because maybe part of it is that his last name is something that you would say to someone to be cruel about their sibling. But anyway, he was I thought that was really interesting. I've already ordered the book. In my copious free time, I will read more about dictionaries. A couple just clean up things. Like, I take him completely at his word about the Amy Coney Barrett thing. It was a really weird coincidence if it wasn't somehow politically influenced. And the fact that so many people wrote it up as if it was a sign of political influence, and there was no effective pushback on it that I can recall. I mean, people can trust their own memories or do their own Googling. Um, I often use that I think I wrote about it at the time as an example of institutions stepping out of their lane and being politicized when they don't need to be. But maybe he's entirely right. I will go back and look. Maybe they did put out a better statement and I missed it. Um, and the piece that my dad wrote, I found a excerpt from it that I had posted in the corner at National Review, 15, 16 years ago. Basically, what my dad did was he went through dictionaries and looked up the definitions for um, um, different dictators. Basically, what my dad did was and I have an excerpt of it, I guess we can put in the show notes if you want, was that right-wing dictators were labeled dictators, left-wing dictators were labeled leaders of revolutionary movements or whatever. So like dictionary called Hitler the Nazi dictator of Germany, fair by me, but it called Stalin the Soviet premier general secretary of the Communist Party of the USSR. Didn't call him a dictator. Mussolini was an Italian dictator, but Tito was the Yugoslav Communist Party leader, prime minister, and president of Yugoslavia. Franco was the dictator of Spain, and Salazar was the prime minister and dictator of Portugal. But Mao Zedong was just simply the Chinese communist leader, chairman of the People's Republic of China and of its Communist Party. And he ran through all this, and it's like this is one of these things that you can see how my dad's son would drive him crazy. Was this sort of double standard thing? He had no problem calling Hitler a Nazi dictator, just like, why aren't you calling Stalin one too? And so I do think there is more, unseen, unacknowledged bias in a lot of these things than people might recognize. And just last thing I mentioned, and it's sort of, but I didn't let the other shoe drop. I think I've talked about it here before, but the origin of slush fund. I'm fascinated by the history, the etymology of terms that come from sort of the British Navy, from war, from military stuff. It's like the term civil engineer was invented because up until then, engineer was just simply a military term for the most part. Anyway, slush fund, the way it worked on British naval ships was the cook would boil a lot of beef to feed the crew or whatever. And there was this gross, bubbly, fatty skim that came to the top of the water. And they called it slush. And the cook would trim that off, and it would congeal into essentially like lard, right? Or suet or whatever. And it had all sorts of uses, for waterproofing ropes or whatever. But you could sell it. There was a market for it. And it was understood that the cook could use the money he made from selling slush, his slush fund, in any way that he saw fit for getting extra stuff for the kitchen and for the crew that they might need. And he was given a lot of leeway for it. And so that's where slush fund comes from. And of course, it has a completely different connotation these days. Anyway, love this stuff. And thanks to Stefan Fatsis again. And thank you all for listening. And I will see you next time.